On September 11th, 2017, at 9:20 in the morning, a 62-year-old farmer named Clayton Worth stood in the service lane at Kendrick Implement, a John Deere dealership on Route 136 outside Macomb, Illinois, and was told by a parts counter employee named Greg that the fuel pump he needed for his 1982 John Deere 4440 was not available for sale to him. Not out of stock, not back-ordered, not available. Clayton had the part number written on a piece of paper. He'd called ahead. He'd driven 87 miles from his farm outside Monmouth. And now Greg, who'd sold him parts for 21 years, was telling him the system wouldn't process the order. Clayton asked why. Greg looked at his screen, looked at Clayton, and said he'd need to get the service manager. The service manager came out 5 minutes later. His name was Todd Breslin. He'd been with Kendrick Implement for 14 years. He told Clayton that parts sales to his account had been restricted per dealership policy. Clayton asked what policy. Todd said it was an internal decision. Clayton asked who made the decision. Todd said it came from ownership. Clayton stood there holding the piece of paper with the part number on it and understood that what he was hearing was not about inventory or credit or back order status, but was about punishment. If you've been farming long enough to know that equipment decisions aren't just mechanical but relational, that dealer relationships can matter as much as horsepower, and that loyalty flows both directions until it doesn't, then you already know this story isn't about one fuel pump. It's about what happens when a company decides to make an example out of a man who made a choice they didn't like. And it's about what that decision cost them in a county where memory runs deeper than marketing. This channel exists to preserve those stories, the ones that take years to show their real weight. If that matters to you, subscribe. We're not going anywhere. Now back to Illinois, back to a parts counter, back to a man holding a piece of paper he couldn't use. Clayton Worth had been farming 920 acres in Warren County, Illinois since 1979. Corn and soybeans. He owned 640 of those acres outright, paid off by 2003. The other 280 he leased from a retired seed dealer who'd known Clayton's father. He ran a clean operation. 2 full-time hired men during planting and harvest, his son Derek helping part-time while finishing an ag degree at Western Illinois. His wife Linda kept the books and managed the grain marketing. Clayton had bought John Deere equipment exclusively since 1989, not because of brand mythology or childhood nostalgia, but because Kendrick Implement in Macomb was 22 miles from his farm, and because for 18 years they had honored warranties without argument, delivered parts same day, and sent service techs out when a machine went down during critical windows. That relationship had been worth something. It had been worth $840,000 in equipment purchases between 1989 and 2016. It had been worth every service interval, every parts order, every filter and belt and hydraulic hose Clayton bought through Kendrick's counter instead of mail-order catalogs or competitor dealers. And in April of 2017, it ended. The failure happened on April 19th, a Wednesday, during spring pre-plant fertilizer application. Clayton was running his 2014 John Deere 8370R, pulling a 60-foot anhydrous applicator across his north section when the tractor's transmission threw a fault code and went into limp mode. Maximum speed dropped to 4 miles per hour. The display showed a valve body malfunction. Clayton shut down, called Kendrick Implement, and had the machine towed in that afternoon. The service department diagnosed a failed transmission control valve assembly, a known issue on early 8370R models. The tractor had 2,890 hours on it. It was still under the factory powertrain warranty, 5 years or 5,000 hours. The repair should have been fully covered. Todd Breslin called Clayton on April 21st and told him John Deere's warranty authorization team had denied the claim. The reason given was contaminated hydraulic fluid. Clayton asked what kind of contamination. Todd said the fluid tested outside specification range for viscosity and particulate count. Clayton asked if they'd sent a sample to a lab. Todd said the dealership's field test was sufficient. Clayton had maintained that tractor exclusively through Kendrick Implement since he bought it in May 2014. Every 200-hour service, every oil change, every hydraulic filter, all of it documented in Kendrick's own service system. He told Todd that. Todd said the contamination must have occurred between service intervals. Clayton asked if they had proof. Todd said the fluid condition was the proof. The repair estimate came to $19,200, including parts, labor, and a transmission fluid flush. Clayton asked Todd if there was any possibility the contamination came from Kendrick's service bay, from a technician using the wrong fluid or a contaminated fill hose. Todd said no. Clayton asked how he could be certain. Todd said because their techs follow protocol. Clayton said he wanted to speak to the dealership owner. Todd said the owner agreed with the service department's assessment. Clayton paid the $19,200 on April 28th with a check from his equipment operating account. He took the receipt, the written warranty denial, and the fluid contamination report and put them in a folder. He finished his fertilizer application 2 weeks late, compressed his planting window, and worked 16-hour days to make up for lost time. By May 15th, planting was complete. Clayton sat at his kitchen table with the folder open in front of him. The $19,200 receipt. The warranty denial, citing customer-caused contamination. The service history showing 3 years of dealer-exclusive maintenance. Linda sat across from him, drinking coffee. She asked what he was going to do. Clayton said he was going to call John Deere corporate. Linda asked if he thought it would matter. Clayton said he didn't know, but he was going to find out. The call to John Deere's customer service line happened on May 17th. Clayton spoke with a representative named Monica, who listened to the full account, took notes, and said she would escalate the case to a regional warranty review team. Someone would contact him within 7 business days. The contact came on May 26th from a man named Stan Overbeck, who had a regional warranty title Clayton didn't write down. Stan said he'd reviewed the case file and was prepared to offer Clayton a goodwill credit of $4,800 toward future John Deere parts or service. Clayton said the dealer-caused contamination cost him $19,200 and 2 weeks of planting season on a machine he'd maintained exclusively through the authorized dealer for 3 years. Stan said the goodwill credit represented John Deere's recognition that the service experience fell below standards. Clayton said it represented $4,800 against $19,200. Stan said it was the maximum available at the regional level. Clayton asked if there was a level above regional. Stan said there was a corporate escalation process. Clayton said he wanted to escalate. The corporate call came on June 7th from a woman named Beth Canfield. She'd reviewed the full case file, including the regional review, and was prepared to offer Clayton a goodwill credit of $7,500 toward a future John Deere equipment purchase. Clayton said he'd bought a $310,000 tractor, maintained it through the authorized network, been charged $19,200 for a repair caused by contamination that most likely originated in the dealer's service bay, and was now being offered $7,500 as John Deere's final position. Beth said the investigation into the contamination source had been inconclusive. Clayton asked if they could prove it didn't come from dealer service. Beth said the investigation was closed. Clayton said thank you and hung up. That was the last call Clayton Worth made to John Deere corporate about anything. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time that evening. Then he went out to his equipment shed and looked at his 6 John Deere machines in the late daylight. The 837R, a 2011 John Deere 8335R, a 2008 John Deere 8330, a 2016 John Deere S680 combine, a 2012 John Deere 6-140D utility tractor, and the 1982 John Deere 43440 his father had given him in 1998, fully restored, 2,100 hours, kept for light field work and sentimental reasons. He stood there looking at them and ran the accounting his father had taught him, the kind that doesn't inflate or minimize but records accurately and draws honest conclusions. The accounting told him what it always told him when the numbers were clear. He went inside and told Linda he was selling 5 of them. Linda asked which 5. Clayton said everything except the 4440. Linda asked what he was replacing them with. Clayton said Massey Ferguson. Linda looked at him across the table with the steady expression of a woman who'd been married to a principled man for 34 years and knew that when he arrived at a decision through the process she'd watched him use since April, the decision wasn't changing. She said then, "We run Massey Ferguson." Clayton said yes. That was the entirety of the conversation that ended John Deere's 28-year relationship with Clayton Worth's operation. The 5 John Deere machines left Clayton's farm across 4 weeks in July 2017. He sold them through a regional farm equipment auction in Galesburg that handled the transactions without ceremony. The Massey Ferguson machines that replaced them arrived in August with the unfamiliarity of equipment Clayton knew by specification but hadn't operated. An MF 8737 to replace the 8370R, an MF 8690 to replace the 8335R, an MF 8680 to replace the 8330, an MF 9540 combined to replace the S680, an MF 5710 utility tractor to replace the 6140D. Total investment $720,000, financed over 7 years through ATCO Finance. Clayton spent the first weeks with the new machines, learning operational differences, hydraulic response, cab layout, the specific feel that every equipment brand carries in its engineering. By September, Clayton had formed the opinion that the Massey Ferguson machines were good machines. Not better than John Deere in every dimension, not worse in every dimension, but different in the way honest alternatives are different. And the difference that mattered most wasn't mechanical. It was that the Massey Ferguson dealer in Galesburg, a man named Ron Keffart, who'd been selling AGCO equipment in western Illinois for 16 years, ran his service operation with transparent accountability. Ron didn't deny warranties to protect his service revenue. He filed claims honestly, appealed denials aggressively, and when something went wrong, he documented it and owned it. Clayton verified that by watching how Ron's service department behaved when a hydraulic line failed on the MF 8737 during the first month. Ron called Clayton personally, explained the failure, ordered the part at no charge, and had a tech at the farm the next morning. No argument, no investigation into whether Clayton had caused it, just service. The change didn't go unnoticed. Warren County isn't large. Farming operations know each other. When a man who's run green equipment for 28 years suddenly shows up at the elevator running red Massey Ferguson iron, people ask questions. Clayton answered them the same way every time, factually, completely, without emotional inflation. He told the story starting on April 19th with the transmission fault code and ending on June 7th with Beth Canfield's $7,500 goodwill offer. He told it to 11 farmers between September 2017 and February 2018, not because he raised it, but because they asked. And when they asked, they deserved an honest answer. Word moved through the county the way it always moves through farming communities, along paths of existing trust. And the trust in Warren County ran through Clayton Worth as reliably as it ran through anyone. Clayton had been farming his 920 acres with visible integrity for 38 years. People trusted his judgment. So when 11 farmers heard the full account of what happened in April, they went home and sat at their own kitchen tables and ran their own accountings. And 9 of them arrived at conclusions that changed their equipment purchasing decisions within 18 months. Kendrick Implement noticed the pattern in early 2018. Service appointments from long-term customers were down. Parts sales were declining. Trade-in traffic had dropped. The sales manager mentioned it in a February staff meeting. Todd Breslin said it was probably just a slow cycle. The owner, a man named Jack Kendrick, whose father had started the dealership in 1973, said they'd see how spring looked. Spring looked worse. By May 2018, Kendrick Implement had lost 6 repeat customers to competitor dealers. 3 of them had switched to Massey Ferguson. All 6 of them had been in Clayton Worth's original 11 conversations. On September 11, 2017, 14 months after Clayton made the fleet change, the injector pump on his 1982 John Deere 4440 failed. The tractor had been running fine. Clayton used it for light utility work, hay hauling, snow removal, the kind of tasks that didn't require 370 horsepower machines. The pump failure was sudden but not catastrophic. The engine lost fuel pressure, sputtered, and died. Clayton diagnosed it in the field, called his son Derek, and had the 44440 towed back to the farm. He pulled the pump, inspected it, and confirmed it needed replacement. He looked up the part number, called Kendrick Implement, and was told they had one in stock. He drove the 87 miles to Macomb. That's where Greg told him the part wasn't available for sale to him. That's where Todd Breslin came out and said parts sales to Clayton's account had been restricted per dealership policy. Clayton asked what the restriction was based on. Todd said it was a business decision. Clayton asked if it applied to all parts or just certain categories. Todd said it applied to all John Deere parts and service. Clayton asked if that included the 4440, a tractor he'd owned since 1998, a tractor that had nothing to do with the 8370R warranty dispute or the fleet change. Todd said the restriction applied to Clayton's account regardless of which machine the parts were for. Clayton asked if Jack Kendrick knew about this. Todd said yes. Clayton walked out of Kendrick Implement, got in his truck, and sat in the parking lot for a long time. He wasn't angry. Anger wasn't an accounting category. He was calculating. He pulled out his phone and called Ron Kefart at the Massey Ferguson dealership in Galesburg. Ron answered on the second ring. Clayton explained the situation. Ron was quiet for a moment, then said, "Let me make a call." 30 minutes later, Ron called back. He'd contacted a John Deere dealer in Q&E, 52 miles northeast of Clayton's farm, a dealership Ron had a professional relationship with through equipment trades and part swaps. The dealer in Q&E had the injector pump in stock. They'd sell it to Clayton at standard retail price, $340. No markup, no questions. Ron had already arranged it. Clayton thanked him and drove to Q&E. He bought the pump, installed it that evening, and had the 4440 running the next morning. But Clayton didn't forget what happened at Kendrick Implement, and he didn't keep it quiet. When farmers asked him how the Massey Ferguson equipment was holding up, he told them it was running well. And then he told them about September 11th, about driving 87 miles for a fuel pump, about being told his account was restricted, about a Massey Ferguson dealer making a phone call to help him get a part for a John Deere tractor that Kendrick Implement refused to sell him. The story traveled. It traveled further than the original warranty dispute, because the warranty dispute could be explained as a policy disagreement, a contamination investigation, a corporate decision. But refusing to sell a man a $340 part for a 40-year-old tractor he'd owned for 20 years, that was something different. That was visible institutional spite, and in farming communities, spite is remembered longer than policy. By November 2018, Kendrick Implement had lost 14 long-term customers. Not all of them switched to Massey Ferguson. Some went to other John Deere dealers. Some switched to Case IH or New Holland. But all 14 of them had one thing in common. They'd heard Clayton's story. They'd heard both stories, the $19,200 transmission denial and the $340 fuel pump restriction, and they'd made decisions. Jack Kendrick called a staff meeting in December 2018. He asked Todd Breslin why service revenue was down 31% compared to 2 years prior. Todd said it was market conditions. Jack said market conditions don't explain why specific customers stopped coming in. Todd didn't have an answer. Jack asked if the parts restriction policy on Clayton Worth's account was still active. Todd said yes. Jack asked who authorized it. Todd said you did. Jack was quiet. Then he said, lift it. Todd asked why. Jack said because it's costing us more than it's saving. The restriction was lifted on December 18, 2018. Clayton never knew. He never went back to Kendrick Implement. He didn't need to. Ron Kefart's dealership in Galesburg handled all his Massey Ferguson parts and service, and when Clayton needed something for the 4440, he drove to Q&E or ordered through an online parts supplier. He never asked Kendrick for anything again. The consequences continued. In 2019, Kendrick Implement's new equipment sales dropped 40% compared to 2016. In 2020, they lost their factory certification as a gold-level John Deere dealership due to declining sales volume and customer satisfaction scores. In 2021, John Deere Corporate sent a territory representative to audit the dealership's customer retention metrics. The report documented 18 customer defections between 2017 and 2020, all of them originating in a relational cluster centered on one farming operation outside Monmouth. The report recommended immediate outreach and relationship repair. Jack Kendrick read the report and filed it. He didn't make the calls. In March 2022, Jack Kendrick sold the dealership to a regional equipment group that operated 17 locations across Illinois and Iowa. The new ownership rebranded, brought in new management, and eliminated the parts restriction policies that had been instituted under the previous regime. Todd Breslin was let go in the transition. Greg, the parts counter employee, stayed on. The dealership is still operating under new ownership, but the customers who left between 2017 and 2020 never came back. Clayton Worth still farms 920 acres in Warren County. He's 69 years old now. He runs Massey Ferguson equipment exclusively, except for the 1982 John Deere 4440 his father gave him. That tractor sits in the corner of his equipment shed, still functional, still used occasionally for light work. It has toothy 780 hours on it now. Clayton replaced the injector pump once, in September 2017, with a part he bought from a dealer in Q&E after being turned away from Kendrick Implement. He's never been back to Kendrick, not for parts, not for service, not even to look at new equipment. When people ask him why, he doesn't explain the full story anymore. He just says the relationship ended and he found better service elsewhere. Derek Worth, Clayton's son, graduated from Western Illinois in 2019 with a degree in agricultural business. He came back to the farm full-time in 2020. He asked his father in 2021 if they should look at the new John Deere 8R series tractors. The specifications were impressive: 4 and 10 horsepower, CVT transmission, advanced guidance systems. The dealer in Macomb under new ownership was offering trade-in incentives. Clayton said no. Derek asked why. Clayton told him the story: the $19,200 transmission denial, the $7,500 goodwill offer, the parts restriction on the 4440, the phone call from Ron Keffart. Derek listened and said he understood. He didn't ask again. In 2023, a John Deere sales representative from the reorganized Macomb dealership called Clayton's farm. The representative introduced himself, said he was reaching out to former customers, and asked if Clayton would be interested in discussing equipment needs. Clayton said no thank you and hung up. The representative called back 2 weeks later. Linda answered. The representative asked if he could schedule a time to visit the farm and show Clayton the new Massey Ferguson lineup. John Deere was? Linda interrupted him. We run Massey Ferguson, she said. The representative apologized and said he must have outdated information. Linda said the information isn't outdated. We switched in 2017 and we're not switching back. The representative asked if there was a reason. Linda said yes and hung up. Ron Keffart still runs the Massey Ferguson dealership in Galesburg. He's 58 years old now. His service department has grown from 4 techs to 9 since 2017. Parts sales are up 60% compared to 6 years ago. New equipment sales have increased every year. In a 2023 interview with a farm equipment trade publication, Ron was asked what accounted for the growth. He said word of mouth. The interviewer asked what kind of word of mouth. Ron said the kind that comes from doing what you say you're going to do and not punishing people for making decisions you don't like. The interviewer asked if he was referring to anything specific. Ron said no, just general philosophy. Clayton Worth doesn't talk about Kendrick Implement much anymore. When neighboring farmers ask him about his Massey Ferguson equipment, he tells them it's been reliable. He tells them Ron Keffart runs an honest service operation. He tells them the machines do what he needs them to do. If they ask why he switched from John Deere, he gives them the short version. Warranty dispute, dealership accountability issue, found better service elsewhere. Most of them already know the full story. It's been circulating in Warren County for 7 years now. Not through social media, not through online forums, just through the old networks. Coffee at the co-op, conversations at the grain elevator, the kind of word that moves through rural communities along paths of trust. The 1982 John Deere 4440 still runs. Clayton starts it once a month to keep everything lubricated. He uses it occasionally for snow removal or moving equipment around the farm. It's the only John Deere machine left on his operation. He's kept it because his father gave it to him, because it's paid for, because it still works, and because keeping it reminds him of September 11th, 2017, the day he drove 87 miles to buy a $340 part and was told his business wasn't wanted. He doesn't need the reminder to stay angry. He's not angry. He just remembers. And memory, in farming communities, is currency. Jack Kendrick retired in 2022 after selling the dealership. He moved to Arizona. He doesn't farm anymore. When the deal closed, he sent a letter to long-term customers thanking them for their business over the years. Clayton received one. He read it once and threw it away. There was no apology in the letter, no acknowledgement of what happened in 2017, just a generic thank you and a signature. Clayton didn't respond. The dealership that bought Kendrick Implement tried to rebuild the customer base. They brought in competitive financing. They offered trade-in incentives. They hired new service managers and retrained the parts department. Some customers came back. Most didn't. The ones who left between 2017 and 2020 had already made their decisions and found new relationships. And in farming, once a relationship is broken, it's almost never repaired, not because of anger, but because of accounting. The accounting that says trust is more valuable than horsepower, that service integrity matters more than brand loyalty, and that when a company decides to punish you for making a choice they didn't like, the cost of that punishment doesn't stop at one fuel pump or one restricted account. It compounds, it spreads, and it's measured not in parts sales or service tickets, but in the conversations that happen at kitchen tables across a county over 7 years. Clayton Worth is still farming. The Massey Ferguson machines are still running. The 4440 is still sitting in the corner of his shed. And Kendrick Implement, under new ownership, is still trying to rebuild what was lost when they decided that $340 was worth more than 28 years of relationship. It wasn't.